There's a lot to talk about, clearly, in the state of Indiana and beyond. But what I want to start with, and what jumped out to me the most, was two teams that did not play, because Indiana will go to Notre Dame in the college football playoff in the first round. And as I said before, this is absolutely fantastic. I implied last week that this was the absolute best case scenario for both teams. It's the best case scenario from a fun perspective, from an entertainment perspective, from a viewership perspective, but it's also the best case scenario for each team, right? Notre Dame absolutely could have been the 6th seed, and they could have been hosting SMU and then going to Boise State. I did not necessarily anticipate that being an outcome that could occur, because I didn't think that SMU would drop after a close loss to Clemson. Obviously, I was wrong. So this was not the best case scenario that could have occurred even in this bracket scenario, but it was very possible that SMU just beats Clemson, right? And Notre Dame, if they sit at the 6th seed, then they host Bama. Or if somehow they ended up with the 5 seed, then they host Clemson, right? Or I suppose in that case, they'd be hosting Arizona State, right? So Notre Dame, in that first round, 100% could have gotten Bama. In my opinion, the way I saw it, I thought that it was either Bama or Indiana for Notre Dame, but there was no other outcome, because I thought that if SMU lost to Clemson close like they did, they wouldn't drop below Indiana. Obviously, that happened. Notre Dame is the 7 seed. Indiana is the 10. They play each other. I thought that the only other outcome other than that matchup would be Notre Dame versus Bama. And, of course, Notre Dame's going to prefer Indiana out of those two. Indiana, on the other hand, dodged some major bullets. It was likely, almost, that they would be going to an SEC school in the first round. Georgia, if they had lost, almost undeniably would be playing against Indiana in this first round. There was an outcome where if Texas lost and if some other scenarios occurred, they could be the 6th seed, Indiana the 11, and they could play each other in the first round. So Indiana can now, instead of going to an SEC school and then maybe playing another one in the second round, they start going to Notre Dame in their own state, a stadium that is much more easy to invade, and Indiana very likely will invade a large part of that stadium. Tickets are well over $1,000 at the moment, triple in expenses to the other first-round games in the college football playoff. It's a fantastically fun matchup, and the winner is going to have real hope, because the winner plays Georgia at a neutral site, and Georgia more than likely is not going to have their starting quarterback for that game. So Notre Dame in particular, right? Because Notre Dame's the favorite. I believe the line came out at 7.5 at open. Notre Dame's the favorite. If they can win this game, then they have a weakened Georgia team, one that just got past, had 2 overtime victories, right? Just got past Texas, just got past Georgia Tech as well in the last game of the regular season without their starting quarterback. If Notre Dame potentially beats Indiana at home, which is very favorable for them, they then have Georgia. Notre Dame has a very favorable path, the second most favorable path, besides Penn State, the most favorable path to get to the semifinals, which almost brings up the point and almost brings up the idea of perhaps wondering if Notre Dame versus Penn State is the most likely semifinal matchup. That brings up more questions, because that would be incredibly fun in and of itself. And the winner of that's going to the championship. We could live in a world where the national championship consists of Penn State or Notre Dame, which is not at all what we would have anticipated at week 1, at week 6, at week 8, 2 weeks ago even, to suggest that Notre Dame and Penn State could manage to find a path to the national championship game. But regardless, let's start with Indiana. We talked a little bit about Notre Dame. I want to start with Indiana. And how do they feel after the rankings came out? Because Indiana effectively knew that they were going to be in the college football playoff just last week when the rankings came out, and they said they told everyone that if you don't play in a conference championship game, you're locked in, right? So Indiana was above Alabama. They're going to stay above Alabama in those at-large rankings. Indiana was below, I guess Penn State's a bad example. Indiana was below Ohio State and Tennessee. Indiana was going to stay there, right? And that's exactly what happened. So Indiana being squarely at number 10, knowing that there could be a maximum of 2 bid stealers. There was 2 bid stealers, Arizona State and Clemson. Indiana's going to be in the field. And they were. So Indiana, works their way in. They find their way at the 10 seed. They have to be feeling amazing. Of course, if you're a Hoosiers fan at this time, you're feeling amazing because you're in the college football playoff and you did not expect to be 12 weeks ago, right? 0% chance in your head that they're going to the playoff 12 weeks ago. They make it here, and now that you know that you're there, you still have to be feeling amazing because, again, you could have had to go to Georgia. You could have had to go to Texas. Instead, they play Notre Dame, a stadium that, again, much more invadable, and Notre Dame, an opponent that is arguably less strong perhaps in Georgia and Texas. Notre Dame has been dominating teams recently, but they don't have the quality wins recently as some of these other teams do. Georgia, Texas, these better rosters just slightly over Notre Dame. Don't get me wrong, Notre Dame is still incredible, will be a very tough game, and I expect Notre Dame to win. But going to Georgia, going to Texas is a nearly impossible task for a first-year Indiana team in their first year under Curt Cignetti, getting to the playoff for the first time, sniffing the playoff at all for the first time, at least since the COVID year when they played 6 games and lost to Ohio State in that thriller against Justin Fields. Indiana got here, right? How? Well, there's easy schedule allegations, right? There's allegations, and I say allegations jokingly almost, allegations that IU had an easy schedule, right? They go through, they play absolutely nobody. The only time they play a great team in Ohio State, they get boat raced. And I think that is a slightly inaccurate view of the Hoosiers. Yes, they lost big to Ohio State, but it wasn't as replicably bad as it looks. That game, Indiana started out 7-0, right? They forced a 3-and-out for Ohio State, then marched down the field and scored in some 10-play drive. So it's clearly Indiana is capable of having success over Ohio State, and they were close in that entire first half. They were working themselves to a situation down 14-7 where they could be able to get the ball back, go down and score, tie up the game before halftime. They had that tragic punt mishap. There were a couple turnovers, and all of a sudden you start to see the game slip away, and as garbage time approaches, IU really has no chance. Now, they could not move the ball against Ohio State. In no way could they move the ball against Ohio State. But they stayed in it from a scoring perspective, right? They stayed in it, touchdown after touchdown. They were going shot for shot with Ohio State early on in that game. And the rest of their schedule I don't think is as bad as it looks. Michigan, and especially now that Michigan has beaten Ohio State, the Michigan win is looking more and more respectable every single day, right? I was in attendance for the Washington game. That one was awesome as well. Arguably not as much of a quality win, but Indiana, that Michigan win was huge. That Michigan win, to me, even more so than the Ohio State game, really proved to me that Indiana deserved to be where they were ranked and deserved to be where they were seated in the college football playoff, because I think Michigan is way more talented and way more dangerous than anyone knows, and I think that's going to show itself when they beat Bama in the bowl game. That's my own personal prediction, and I understand that opt-outs are going to tamper with that a little bit, but I think Michigan's great, and I think that win from Indiana over Michigan absolutely proved a lot about the Hoosiers. They almost didn't deserve to be here, right? If they would have finished 11-1 with that loss to Ohio State, the way they lost that game with the wins that they had on their resume, they might have been out. But the SEC blew itself up. The ACC blew itself up, right? Ole Miss dropped out. South Carolina dropped out. Miami dropped out. Clemson dropped out. Honestly, they just stole a bid later on. BYU dropped out. Colorado dropped out. SEC and ACC blew up, right? They all took each other out. They're all out, and IU now all of a sudden is a shoo-in for the playoff, and here they are. So they got lucky. Arguably, it was convenient that they were so good in this season with a 12-team playoff, right? And with a 12-team playoff where it feels like nobody can put together a string of a few wins if you play a tough schedule, that's exactly what they did to get here. The road was paved for them, and then they did exactly what they needed to do by beating Purdue 66-0, and that is how Indiana got to the college football playoff. Now the question is how they can win. And we're not going to talk about necessarily how they can win the entire playoff today, but how they can beat Notre Dame. And they can do it defensively with run defense and offensively with an established run game as well. The run game has to be won by the Hoosiers, and that's going to be nearly impossible. It doesn't even have to be won. It just has to be competitive, right? Justice Ellison, at the end of the game, we should be looking at the scoreboard if Indiana won and saying, the rushing yards are close, right? The rushing production across the board is close between Justice Ellison and Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love is Notre Dame's best player. He's incredible. He single-handedly dominates teams, right? That Virginia win, the Army win, right? Like, Jeremiah Love 100% can take over a game for Notre Dame, and he has against inferior opponents week after week after week after week ever since that loss in week 2 to Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois, by the way, has one of the top 5 defenses in terms of preventing other teams from gaining yards in the country. Jeremiah Love's your best player, right? So Indiana, to counteract that, has statistically the best rush defense in the country. Now, I understand the fact that they're playing against teams that maybe have weaker running games than you have SEC schools that are getting run all over. You have Ohio State as Quinshon Judkins, right, who's running all over people. So different schools with different schedules are going to have different difficulties of preventing the run. Indiana statistically has the best rush defense in the country. That has to at least mean something. That has to mean it at least is somewhat efficient and productive. They allow just 80.5 rushing yards a game, less than 100 rushing yards a game. Jeremiah Love has 1,100,000-yard rushing games. So something has to give there, right? Unstoppable force and immovable object. Something is going to have to give. So Indiana's best rush defense in the country statistically could be used to take away Jeremiah Love or at least significantly restrict him. That takes away the Irish's number one strength, and then if you're the Hoosiers, you can go from there, right? Start by taking out Jeremiah Love as much as you can and moving forward. Got to have an established run game on offense, though, as well, right? That's the case for a couple reasons, because the winter weather is going to be difficult to deal with, especially through the air, and that's going to affect both teams, even though they're both in Indiana, even though they're both theoretically, quote-unquote, used to it, right? Poor weather conditions, that's going to inhibit the passing game. Justice Ellison has got to be churning early on. Notre Dame has the third best pass defense. That's going to make things difficult to deal with. They have a menacing secondary across the board. Justice Ellison has got to be an anchor. And the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as well, in addition to their third best pass defense, they don't have a weak position group in the front seven. Their defensive line is incredible. And when Indiana has played incredible defensive lines, namely Ohio State and Michigan, they haven't been able to move the ball. They've scored I believe it was actually 15 points in both games. They scored 15 points in each. They scored 20 against Michigan. So 20 against Michigan, 15 against Ohio State. I believe less than 2 yards per play against Ohio State in non-garbage time minutes. So when you're playing elite defensive lines, it's been very difficult for the Hoosiers to move the ball. That is just going to straight up have to change against Notre Dame. And that's what makes this matchup so difficult, is the fact that the winter weather conditions are going to be poor, right? And Notre Dame's entire defense is incredible. Pass defense, incredible. Run defense, incredible. Pass rush, incredible. So Notre Dame is going to have an ability to lock down IU early, get out to a 10-point lead, and then just maintain that the rest of the game on the ground with Jeremiah Love. That's the way Notre Dame has won games all year. That's the way they should be able to win this game against IU in the first round. Let's talk about Notre Dame, right? We keep hinting at it. We keep sort of teasing it. Let's talk about Notre Dame. They should be slightly disappointed. And they should be slightly disappointed, but accepting of their seeding. They're seeded where they deserve to be seeded, as an independent, as a team that didn't play in a conference championship game. They dip down to number 7 as Texas loses and they get jumped by Georgia, right? So Texas remains ahead of them. Penn State remains ahead of them. They very well could have been the 6th seed. The difference is one more team slots in ahead of them in the seeding, and that was Georgia for winning the SEC championship, right? If that doesn't happen, if Texas wins and if Oregon wins, as they did, it'd be number 1 Oregon, number 2 Texas, number 3 number 3 Boise State, number 4 Arizona State, and then number 5 Penn State, because they should stay above Notre Dame, not getting punished for losing their conference championship game, and then number 6 Notre Dame. And that would put them in that position where Penn State is at the 6th seed, where they host SMU and then play Boise State in a neutral site game, and they are resoundingly the favorites to go to the semifinals. Penn State is favored to go to the semifinals, right? If you bet money on the Penn State to make the semifinals, you will lose money, right? It's that likely that they're going to do it at that 6th hole in the bracket. That's where Notre Dame could have been if that overtime result between Georgia and Texas is flipped. They're not, and that's very disappointing, because you do have to host a white-hot IU team that, despite that loss to Ohio State, has been incredibly dominant all year, and you do still have to play Georgia. So Notre Dame has, I would say, the second most favorable draw. I think Texas at the 5 seed, honestly, got one of the toughest out of those top 3 at-large teams, because they host Clemson, who's a very talented team, right? Despite the fact that Swinney has been reluctant to use the transfer portal, they do have a very talented roster. They have been winning games. They did just beat SMU, and they were up big in the first half. And then they would have to play Arizona State, another white-hot team that just won a conference championship as well. Texas is coming off a loss. Regardless, Notre Dame, they could have been the 6th seed. They're not. They're the 7. They're accepting of that because that's what they deserve, but it's a bit disappointing knowing how close that Georgia-Texas result was and could have been. Notre Dame lost in Northern Illinois. That happened in week 2. That happened months ago. I remember that game. It was shocking, and the discussion at that time was that maybe Notre Dame wasn't going to make the playoff. At that time, we still thought USC was going to be awesome. They were a top 10, top 15 team, around the time that they were about to play LSU, right? And the discussion was that maybe Notre Dame wasn't going to make the playoff, even with that one loss, even if they would beat LSU or USC, especially with that loss to USC. We would think that this Northern Illinois loss would kill them. Now, similar to Indiana's path to the playoff, the world blew up around them. The SEC blew up, the ACC blew up, and Notre Dame had a perfect road paved for them to walk into the playoff. And they not only walked into the playoff, they walked in peaking in the AP and the College Football Playoff rankings at number 3 and finishing at number 4. Notre Dame was totally fine. The 12-team playoff gave them enough of a cushion. They, I believe, would be in the playoff even if they did not have that cushion. Totally fine, right? Lost to Northern Illinois, but just in the specific season that we're in, it ended up not being a problem at all. They've been dominating teams recently, playing their best football across the board. Their last 3 games in backwards order, they beat USC 49-35, 49-14 over Army, who was ranked at that time and I believe still is, and then 35-14 over Virginia. Notre Dame just has a few ways they can win. Home field, 100%. The weather conditions are going to be in their favor. This is a big game feel that we've never seen before from Notre Dame. This is because there's never been a home playoff game at any venue, right? So Notre Dame is going to play in the playoffs at home. That is something that we have never seen or felt before across the board in that stadium, and that knowing that Notre Dame fan base, it's going to be electric, and knowing that Indiana fan base, it's going to be electric. Home field for Notre Dame is absolutely pivotal in this game, and that's a huge reason why these tickets are over $1,200. Notre Dame has better talent, all right, across the board. Notre Dame has better players. They're putting better players on the field than Indiana is. They should be able to just show that. Physically stronger, faster, more athletic, more talented, whatever words you want to use, Notre Dame is better across the board. That doesn't mean they're going to win, right? We see that in college football every single year, but it means that they should be much more likely to. They should be favored to, and they are, and they should have enough of a head start in this game, perhaps, to where in these conditions with the better talent and with matchup advantages, they should be able to beat IU across the board. Notre Dame's last 4 recruiting classes have an average rank of 10.5. Indiana's last 4 average recruiting class rank is 42.5. That's the difference between these two teams. That's the difference between Notre Dame, surefire year after year, top 10, or just hovering around there, top 10 recruiting class type of team. Indiana just barely gets into the top 50, right? Again, doesn't mean Notre Dame's that much better than Indiana. Doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to win. It just means Notre Dame's talent is that much better than Indiana, and that's going to show itself, especially in a big-time game like this. Riley Leonard is theoretically better than Cordis Rourke. Jeremiah Love is theoretically better than Justice Ellison, and Bo Collins is theoretically better than Elijah Surratt. Those are the 3 skill positions on offense. Notre Dame checks the box on all 3. Notre Dame's going to be awesome. They're going to be incredible, and it's going to be a very tall task for Indiana to win this one. We'll talk more and preview more this game the week that it comes, but I'm not thrilled about Indiana's chances to win this game in advance in the college football playoff.